Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for this webinar is Solar Risk, How Energy Storage Can Preserve Solar Savings in California Affordable Housing. This webinar is a presentation of Clean Energy Group's Resilient Power Project, and we have an excellent guest speaker with us today, as well as our host for this webinar, who is Seth Mullendore. Seth is the project director for our Resilient Power Project here at Clean Energy Group. Before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. So on your screen right now, you should see something that looks a bit like the webinar console that popped up when you launched the webinar. This little orange arrow button here, you can use that to expand or minimize the webinar console so that you can view the presentation full screen if you'd like to. For the audio, you have a couple of options to join the audio portion of the webinar. By default, you are connected using your computer mic and speakers, but you can also choose to call in using your telephone. If you expand the audio box on your webinar console and select telephone, it will give you dial-in information that you can use. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on the webinar console and hitting send. We will be reading through your questions as they come in throughout the webinar, and we're going to save about 15-20 minutes following our presentations for a Q&A with the audience. So it's important that you type your question in when you think of it. Don't wait until the end, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you a follow-up email within about 24-48 hours with a link to the webinar slides and recording. And you can also find this webinar on our website along with all of our previous Resilient Power Project webinar recordings at resilient-power.org. So with that, I would like to pass it over to our host for this webinar, Seth Mullendore.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you to everyone joining us today. Really appreciate you attending our webinar. So I'm going to just take a few minutes here to introduce you to who we are here at Clean Energy Group and the Resilient Power Project, which is bringing you this webinar today. Clean Energy Group is a national nonprofit that works in pretty much all areas of clean energy with focus on innovation in finance and bringing technologies to a broader market and policy solutions to clean energy. We also have a sister organization called the Clean Energy States Alliance that is a coalition of state energy fund managers. So a lot of state energy offices are part of Clean Energy States Alliance. Resilient Power Project has been around for a little over 3 years now. It's a joint project with the Meridian Institute and is completely foundation funded. You'll see here a number of foundations that support our work, and without them, the Resilient Power Project would not be possible. So give you a little bit of background about what the Resilient Power Project is. The main goal of the project is to increase public and private investment and support for clean, resilient power solutions. We really focus this on solar combined with energy storage, sometimes with other technologies like combined heat and power as well. The impetus for the program was all the outages that occurred in the wake of things like Superstorm Sandy left so many folks, particularly folks in disadvantaged neighborhoods and low-income housing, without power and without the resources to live their lives in a normal way. The project is focused on low-income communities and disadvantaged communities with two real key parts to that. One is affordable housing, lots of work in multifamily affordable housing, and then critical public facilities, which can be anything from emergency shelters or healthcare facilities to first responders, things like that. We really engage at all levels, from federal to state down to the city level, and to working on individual projects as well. We have some, through our foundation support, we have some technical assistance funding, which we can help support the feasibility of projects, to both the technical and economic feasibility of installing a resilient power system at a facility. And we also provide some high-level analysis and technical support in-house. Through this work, we do a lot of webinars like the one today. We've put out a number of reports. You can see a few covers of those down below. Again, we're going to talk about one of those today. And we also have newsletters, blogs, and a whole website worth of information. This is a screenshot of the website. You can reach us at resilient-power.org. We have recordings of all our webinars. All of our publications are available on there, as well as contact information if you want to learn some more, and a number of other great features to learn more about resilient power and the types of projects that have been installed across the United States. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. I'm going to be up first. I'm going to give kind of a broad overview of what we found through our most recent report, and how some changes to policy and rates in California can impact the economics of solar savings. And after me, to dig in deeper onto some of the economics and how this affects financing, is going to be our other guest speaker, who is Wayne Waite. Wayne Waite is the former Regional Energy and Climate Manager for the U.S. Department of Urban Development, and served as the Policy Director before that, or after that. He served as Policy Director for the California Housing Partnership Corporation, which is an advocate for a number of affordable housing property owners in California. He worked with a number of nonprofits to prepare a proposal for the implementation of a multifamily affordable housing solar program that is being currently implemented in California. And he still works in that capacity as a consultant for these foundations, or for these nonprofits, through a grant support from the Energy Foundation. So that, I'd like to start things off today. Sam, if you could, yeah, thank you. So I'm going to talk about our latest report, which is called Solar Risk, reducing, no, that's the wrong title there, but it's called Solar Risk, wrong subtitle. It's Solar Risk, How Energy Storage Can Preserve Solar Savings in California's Affordable Housing. What this report looked at was a 50-unit affordable housing property in San Diego. This is a representative property, but it uses real interval data, 15-minute interval utility data from a property in Southern California, and looks at actual utility rates, that the current rates and proposed rates for San Diego Gas and Electric. Part of the reasons we chose a property in San Diego is because San Diego Gas and Electric currently has a pending rate case that provides some insight into what their rates will look like in a few years, and in over the next few years, how those are going to evolve over time. The real reason for looking at these in the beginning was a shift in time of use rates. I'll get into that a little bit more. We wanted to evaluate the impact that these changes and other changes that were coming down the line, both to net energy metering policies and proposed utility rates, would have on the value of solar systems for affordable housing, both for affordable housing owners and for tenants as well. In addition to that, we also looked at the ability of energy storage to offset those, well, what you'll see are the anticipated losses to solar value. The key findings from the report are that these proposed policy and rate changes, which I'll get into in a minute, could erode bill savings from solar for affordable housing property owners by 56% for the property that we looked at in this report. Affordable housing tenants, which they face a number of the same changes and impacts, and see a 29% reduction in their solar savings. And there are some other implications on top of that Wayne will get into and explain more. We also found that adding energy storage to solar could unlock additional bill savings, at least on the property owner side, that were enough that they could reverse the solar losses and potentially be an economic solution to preserve the value of solar. By increasing those savings, energy storage can also improve the project financing feasibility and boost project cost coverage by as much as 60% in some cases. Wayne, again, is going to get into that after I present a quick overview of the findings. Also wanted to mention that the property that we looked at in this report, another reason that we used that is it was one that we had looked at before in an earlier report that we did about a year ago called Closing the California Clean Energy Divide, which looked at the economics of solar and storage in California multifamily affordable housing. This was done partly to inform that program that I mentioned, the multifamily affordable housing solar roofs program. That's going to be potentially $1 billion in funding for solar projects in multifamily affordable housing over the next 10 years. So the changes that I'm talking about, this is the shifting solar landscape that we're seeing in California. There are three main aspects that we looked at as far as the changes to policy and utility rates that will significantly impact solar bill savings as they stand right now. The first of those, and the real reason for initially looking at things, was this shifting of time of use rates. So time of use rates are utility rates that charge customers different values for different times of the day. So depending on when you're consuming electricity, you may pay a different price. Right now, it's structured that the highest price periods are during the middle of the day when solar is producing the most energy. The proposal is to shift those to later in the day into the evening periods, which are becoming the peak periods in California when energy demand is greatest on the whole system. The second thing that the report looked at was non-bypassable charges. Non-bypassable charges are things that are charged per kilowatt hour, so for the consumption of energy, and they cover things like public purpose programs. So they affect net metering now. They're being applied to any energy that is exported to the grid through a net energy metering system. This is particularly important for multifamily housing when they're participating in virtual net metering program. Virtual net metering is a program that allows a building to split the solar generation between, say, the common area and multiple tenant meters. In the configuration in California of their virtual net metering, all the energy is exported. So that means that all the energy generated by the system are going to be subject to these non-bypassable charges. The third piece is increasing in utility demand charges. This is from the rate case that San Diego Gas and Electric is currently under consideration. There's a fairly significant increase to the demand charges. These are just affecting the commercial side of the system, so only the owner's side. Tenants are not subject to demand charges. Residential rates typically are not subject to demand charges, but the commercial side, the property owner, the building side, does have these demand charges. And these are for the highest kilowatt usage in any sort of billing period. So within a month, the highest per kilowatt demand that a building has. So to get into what this actually looks like in the analysis, I just want to give you a picture of what this time of use rate shifting or period shifting looks like. So these are two graphs here. The first graph on the top shows what the current time of use peak periods are, different rate periods are for San Diego Gas and Electric. The bottom graph shows the proposed change in the peak pricing periods, and the blue line on both of them is the same line there. That shows the typical solar generation for an August day. And this is, again, this is looking at August, the month of August, typical day in August for both of these proposed periods. As far as the generation of solar throughout the year, under the current time of use peak periods, currently it's from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. That's the peak pricing period when electricity is the highest price and you'll get the most value for any solar generation that you produce. Currently about 50%, 46% is generated during the peak period typically, and the remainder, 54%, is in the semi-peak period, that orange bars on the side. And electricity costs a little bit less during the semi-peak periods, but not as low as the off-peak period, which really doesn't have any solar generation at all. In August, it's even more pronounced. In August, when really solar generation is the highest, you'll see about 70% of the solar generation occur during the peak period. Now, under the proposed time of use pricing periods, that was in the bottom graph, the peak period will shift from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., as it currently is, to 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. So it's shifting to the evening period. It's really when people come home from work. Anyone that's familiar with what's called in California the duck curve, solar tends to carve out a lot of usage in the day, so utilities really want to shift the peak pricing periods later in the day when they're seeing their peak demand shifting away from the midday, which typically has been where the peak demand has occurred. It's now happening in the evening. So utilities are trying to shift the highest price periods to those periods. So in addition to moving the period later in the day, the peak period is actually reduced a little bit. It's a shorter period, so there's less time to be exporting that energy. Under the proposed solar time of use periods, or the proposed time of use periods for San Diego Gas and Electric, you can see throughout the year, only 23% of the solar production occurs in the peak during that red period in the bottom, the red bars there, and 77% occurs during the off-peak period. So you can see this is a very big shift in what the economics look as far as the pricing of electricity during those times and the price of electricity that you're going to be either offsetting on site or exporting to the grid. Your solar energy appears to be worth significantly less. And in fact, that's what the analysis found. This graph here on the left side, you can see is what the current annual savings are for the system that we looked at. It's about a 52 kilowatt PV system for this affordable housing property. And the projected savings under the current rates for the, without any of the changes that I discussed, those three change areas, it's about $7,500 per year in return. That first red bar shows a decrease in value for the time of use shifting. So under new time of use rates, there's a loss in solar value of about $1,000. That represents about a 14% drop in revenue from solar savings. This is, again, for San Diego Gas and Electric. Some other folks have looked at this in other utility territories. There's a company called Sage Renewables that looked at the pricing difference for Pacific Gas and Electric. This is more around the San Francisco area. And they found that you could find a drop in solar value for commercial systems in the range of 20 to 40%. So it's less significant for San Diego Gas and Electric, at least in this case, but it's still a very significant drop in the value. Interestingly, though, as the analysis showed, the other two changes, the non-bypassable charges and increase in demand charges, were actually more significant in decreasing the value that solar could return. Those non-bypassable charges, they're pretty small. They're about 2 cents per kilowatt hour, but they really add up when you apply them to all the generation on the system. They ended up dropping the solar savings by about $1,400. That's a 19% decrease in value. And then the biggest change happened to this because of this increase in demand charges, because more of the cost comes from demand. Solar is not very good at decreasing demand charges because it can't consistently do that throughout the month. So this increase in demand charges resulted in a $1,700 loss in solar value. It's about a 23% loss of value. We ended up with a projected savings that are just a bit more than $3,000 per year. This represents a 56% loss in solar savings throughout the year, which is extremely significant and really could impact the whole feasibility of a project. So we found those results were quite dramatic. Then the analysis went on to explore, okay, well, what if we add in energy storage to this solar system? Same solar system, and just adding a battery system to that, to look at how that could change the economics and what it could do, since it unlocks additional value streams. Those value streams that were explored in this analysis, one is solar time shifting. This is basically sometimes called energy arbitrage. It's storing the solar energy that's produced under the off-peak periods and then discharging it on the peak periods. So because the electricity is worth less on off-peak and more on the peak period, you gain some value back if you store it and then discharge it at a later time during the peak period. The second area is called demand charge management. What this basically is the battery discharges when the building is using, has its highest demand for energy. So when energy demand peaks, instead of getting grid energy, you're getting energy from the battery system. So that lowers your peak demand and manages your demand charges so that the facility ends up paying less demand charges because the overall peak is lower. The third area, which is not applicable to all buildings, but when it is, can result in some pretty big savings, is utility rate tariff switching. So for some buildings, there's the ability to lower demand to such a point that it goes below a threshold where the utility no longer charges the facility demand charges because the overall peak demand is below the threshold where they charge demand charges. So you see that that actually has the most dramatic savings potential, but is not applicable to all buildings. Just happened to be applicable to this one building, which we had seen because of analysis that we had done before, looking at the same load profile. So here's a look at the first two revenue streams that are possible that we explored: the time shifting and demand charge management, resulting in reduced demand charges. You see, again, some pretty significant results here. Time shifting, there's not a whole lot of value here. Again, this is fairly specific to Southern Gas and Electric, or San Diego Gas and Electric. The difference between peak and off-peak is fairly small for San Diego Gas and Electric, not as big as say, somewhere like Pacific Gas and Electric. So there is some opportunity to add extra value back by doing that energy arbitrage, the store when the price of electricity is low and discharge when it's high. But the more significant savings value was in reducing the peak demand and reducing demand charges. You could see that's upwards of almost $5,000 in savings, and represents the lion's share of the savings. I think it was about 85% of the savings came from this demand charge management. And with those two, you can actually recoup all the losses that solar had and end up with annual savings of nearly $9,000, which is more than a solar alone system could achieve before these changes were made. So energy storage does add this incremental cost, but unlocks enough savings that it more than makes up for the anticipated losses in the value of solar. So this last graph I'm going to show here is looking at what happens with this rate shifting scenario. And you can see that the results there are quite dramatic. You go to almost $28,000 in savings a year. The reason for this is twofold. One is you no longer have the demand charges. So the demand charge cost goes down. I'll just explain a little bit how this works too. In San Diego Gas and Electric, the threshold for switching to a rate tariff that does not have a demand charge is 20 kilowatts. So that's the maximum peak demand that a facility can have and be on a rate tariff that does not have demand charges. So this building, I don't remember offhand, I think that the peak was less than 30 kilowatts in its original load profile. And implementing the energy storage system, you were able to reduce demand every month enough that it was never above 20 kilowatts. Now, the facility will have to show that it can do that over time in order to be able to switch tariffs, but then it should be able to switch to this non-demand tariff. So no longer has demand charges, so it's a big cost reduction. Also has lower fixed charges, and that's due to less complexity in measuring. Then the utility no longer has to measure the demand charges, so there's less metering costs that go along with that and the fixed charges. The other thing that changes is the non-demand tariff has higher rates per kilowatt hour. So it has higher energy consumption rates, which increases the value of the solar. It does increase the cost of the electricity that you're consuming, but it also acts to increase the value of the solar as well. All in all, those two changes still result in a big savings. You get $10,000 of extra value out of your solar and over $14,000 in reduced demand charges and fixed charges. It's really pretty stunning results. It's about 8 times the savings you could get with a solar only system after the changes, which is shown on the left there. So I lied, there is one more graph here. I'm just briefly going to touch on this. Wayne's going to go into this in much more detail. This is looking at the loss of value for tenants with solar. Again, on the left, the green bar is showing that the current solar savings that could be achieved before any of the changes are implemented. They don't have demand charges, as I mentioned, but they do have the shift in time of use rates will also affect tenants. California is switching all solar customers over to time of use rates. So there's a loss of value due to the time of use peak period shifting, about 14% loss, and then the non-bypassable charges also affect tenants in the same way. It's another 14% loss, and you see that's a 29% loss total, almost 3% loss in the value. Doesn't look as significant as the commercial side, but there are a lot of other implications in this that may get a really big impact to tenants potentially. And as I said, Wayne will get into that in much more detail, so I'm not going to discuss that more at this point. So just briefly, before handing it over to Wayne, I want to talk a little bit about the policy implications for this. As I mentioned, California is getting ready to implement this program called the Multifamily Affordable Housing Solar Roofs Program. Potentially, as I said, $1 billion over 10 years to install solar on affordable housing. The real driver behind the program is to get the benefits of solar savings to tenants. Tenants have to be the primary beneficiary from the solar systems that are provided, and it has incentives for owners as well to install these systems. So that in particular, it raises a lot of questions, with these changes to how rates are structured and then how policy will affect solar savings. It'd be good to know how many properties this actually impacts and how many storage can help. Not all multifamily buildings have demand charges. Not all of them are going to have the same savings opportunities with energy storage that the one that we modeled will. Again, these results are somewhat limited because we're looking at one building in one of the utility territories in California, so we can't draw, we can't draw widely applicable conclusions from this, but it does offer a window into what the impacts could be and how both solar could be impacted and how energy storage could affect those impacts. It's also really important to explore what are the barriers to deploying storage with solar and affordable housing. This is something that both Wayne and I have been looking into quite a bit lately. There are some regulatory issues that need to be sorted out to make sure that particularly buildings that are participating in virtual net metering can access the savings of storage in the same way that folks that are doing normal net metering can. So there are a number of things to sort out there. And the question of should solar programs that incentivize solar, incentivize storage as well. This is not to say that every solar system is going to make sense to install storage, but from the analysis that's been done, it seems like there's potential for some buildings to really be able to increase their savings and potentially insulate the solar value by deploying energy storage. Energy storage adds a lot of flexibility to a solar system and can insulate it from changes that can come down the pike, such as the ones that we explored in this. Also want to talk about the national policy implications. This is a map from the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. It's called the 50 States of Solar Report. They put this out quarterly. It was looking at 2016. In 2016, 28 states considered or enacted changes to net energy metering. 16 states looked into the value of distributed generation and the cost-benefit analysis of net energy metering. 16 utilities looked at increasing charges for rooftop solar customers, and several utilities proposed implementing demand charges for residential customers. The basic takeaway here is California can be a harbinger of things that are to come for a lot of other states, particularly states that are putting in a lot of solar energy. And these are going to be issues that other states are going to have to deal with, and this is not the end of this kind of solar risk in deploying these systems. So we think that you're going to see this a lot more in a lot of other places, and these need to be considered now. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Wayne to continue the conversation, and then we'll open things up for questions at the end.
Okay, this is Wayne Waite, and thank you, Seth, and thanks everybody for joining in today. What I have to say is going to be building, I think, on the analysis that kind of Seth provided an overview on. A big concern and focus of the analysis was on project feasibility, and I'm just trying to, there we go, advance the slide. And basically, you know, will these projects continue to pencil as the utility rate structures and policies change? And as Seth has noted, this is not really a California-specific concern. These questions, I think, are being asked across the country. Since December, we've seen quite a number of articles flagging concerns over future rate changes pending in some of the California general rate cases. In one Green Tech Media article in February, CalCIA members are quoted and had observed that the customers could see a 9% to 20% reduction in bill savings from solar devaluation alone. And they further noted that these reductions could put a lot of customers underwater with their power purchase agreements, leases, or loans. So we've been asking ourselves, I think, in California, specifically in an affordable housing context, is solar PV a reliable hedge against changing utility policies and costs for property owners? Can solar PV systems generate net positive economic benefits and continue to do so for low-income tenants? And what strategies are needed to protect investments? To recap from Seth's overview, we found that the property cash flows are certainly adversely affected by some of these utility TOU changes, and we've modeled really a number of utility rate structures, and the range of the impacts that we saw range from 15 to 25% reduction in energy savings levels. On the tenant side, the reductions were lower, as Seth pointed out, but broadly in the range of 10 to 15%. And there's also kind of an added twist here. Not only would solar decline as part of these changing TOU periods, but in California, the mandatory requirement to convert to a TOU schedule would potentially have adverse economic effects on about 30% of the low-income tenants, based upon some analysis that Southern California Edison did. And that analysis showed that on average, for the 30% of tenants, that energy cost burden could increase by as much as 31.6%. So these concerns are this changing TOU period and requirements for TOU is a big concern to certainly affordable housing advocates. We also, in addition to the TOU rate changes, there's also other factors that come into play that affect the feasibility. And Seth again mentioned the demand charges, and what we have seen is that demand charges have been on the rise and consistently on the rise for some times now. Over the last a 10-year period between 2005 and 2015, within the California IOU jurisdictions, the average annual increases have ranged from 7% to over 16%. So they're quite large on an annual basis. And secondly, the increase in demand charges in California and many other areas across the country has actually outpaced the increase in electric use charges. So in short, we can no longer rely on electricity price inflation as a hedge against rising costs with respect to PV systems. And for low-income properties, this is a special concern because these trends pose added risks, because the rents at affordable multifamily properties are regulated. And additionally, according to HUD, the rents have not kept pace with rising utility costs now for over a decade. So there are some real concerns in the affordable housing market segment about getting underwater. So to assess the impacts of some of these trends, we looked at the comparative changes in project cost coverage under different utility rate structures. And to do this, we estimated the amount of debt that could be supported by the cash flow. And then we estimated the amount of project costs that would be reasonably covered from the energy savings from PV. And this is shown in this chart as a percentage of the total project costs. So in this first chart here, we're looking at a common area system cost coverage, and we see that 42% of the project costs could be covered under the current tariff structure, and that's the bar that is on the left, and that's a pretty good value. And in fact, we're looking, as Seth mentioned, at a specific rate structure in this analysis. In this case, the TOU-AL rate structure. Under other rate structures, that level of cost coverage would be much higher. So this is a good place, and there's really good pathways to project feasibility at that level. The outlook, however, changes when we model financing. We model the financing using TOU tariff structures and charges that are projected for the future under these new structures that have been proposed by SDG&E. And the result is that there is a decline of over 20% in the amount of project cost coverage that might be feasible, from these systems. And there's some implications of this. Not only do they pose some out-year project risk and diminish the value proposition of for the property owner, but just in terms of project feasibility, new revenue streams or strategies might be needed to really make these projects pencil. With respect to the second chart here, this shows the similar dynamic associated with the revenue streams for tenants. And here in the first bar on the left, we see the cost coverage estimate of about 56%. Again, quite good under the modeled current TOU rates for households under the care rate structure. And this coverage changes to 40% after taking into account the devaluation from solar and some of the added costs that Seth mentioned. This picture actually still looks pretty robust at 40%. However, for tenants, there are other issues in play that alter this picture somewhat. And what I mean by that, and first and foremost, is really the matter of tenant benefits. With respect to the California programs, there's a requirement that tenants economically benefit from the solar installations that would be made on multifamily affordable housing properties. And in this regard, tenant benefits mean that some portion of the energy savings that are produced by the PV systems and credited to the tenants on their utility bills would be retained for the exclusive use of the low-income tenant. In other words, that amount of benefit that's being, in a sense, provided to them cannot be recaptured in some way through rent increases or possibly other things. So in our analysis, we looked at tenant benefits under a number of scenarios. And the third bar over from the left, the dark orange bar, shows the percentage of project costs that could be covered where a tenant receives 80% of the value of the solar credits that are generated. So effectively, a substantial decline in the amount of coverage or contribution, if you will, that tenants could potentially make towards the cost of these systems. So the implications of that are there now is looks like a fairly steep financial gap to scale solar to tenant units and deliver the required benefits. And there may be the need for additional program resources to reach these households. And there's also some risk that's kind of evident, that became evident in the analysis, that there's a potential for higher tenant cost burdens without some protection around these tenant benefits. Now you might say that, well, 80% is pretty darn generous. Let's reset this to a lower value, but there are still other factors that affect the tenants, what the tenants actually receive at the end of the day, and these things may also affect what amount of coverage that might or could be expected from tenant energy savings. So in the next two charts, what we're looking at are factors that affect tenant benefits broadly. And in addition to the utility tariff-related reductions, which are shown in the red bars on the right, housing policies also affect tenant benefits, and those housing policy effects are shown in the yellow bars on the left. And by housing policies, I'm specifically referring to utility allowance adjustments that would result after, or could result after, a PV system installed. Under the utility allowance adjustment process, the property owners or funding agencies can lower the amount of the utility allowance included in the tenant's rent calculation. And what this does, this action actually increases the tenant's rent payment. So shown in the chart are the estimated reductions to tenant benefits that could be expected from a project that offsets 70% of the tenant's electricity usage. And this is a pretty optimistic scenario for a PV system in a multifamily housing project to offset 70% of each and every tenant's electricity usage. It would be probably a fairly robust and fairly large system. The utility allowance calculations here reflect the adjustment process that has been approved by the California State Housing Finance Agency for the low-income housing tax credit. So each state, each state housing finance agency will have some process or some approved rules for making these adjustments. In California case, where solar is installed, it's possible to make these adjustments, and the adjustment process involves two parts. The first yellow bar, somewhat in the middle, shows the reductions to the pre-solar utility allowance baseline which would occur. And those baseline changes are ones that don't factor in solar at all. They're basically adjustments to account for things like energy efficiency or differences between a public housing schedule and the new modeling assumptions that are made as part of this, through this adjustment process. The second part of the adjustment, which is that far yellow bar, is the reductions for the portion of energy offsets that are actually received from by the tenant from the PV system. And in this case, we assumed again that the tenants would retain or keep 80% of those solar credits. So that yellow bar reflects about a 20% reduction to the a reduction in the utility allowance that's equivalent to about 20% of the solar credits that are received by the household. So this process, this utility allowance process is real. It exists in every state. The process will vary by state and by program. And HUD properties are particularly problematic here because all of the solar benefits go to the HUD secretary. So the bottom line is that when all these factors are accounted for, even under an optimistic scenario, one where we're offsetting 70% of the tenant's electricity usage, there's not much left at the end of the day remaining for the tenant. In this scenario here, it amounts to about $39. Now, the next chart shows the same types of declines, but under a less optimistic scenario, one in which the solar PV system only offsets 30% of the tenant's electricity usage. And again, we see the really substantial and significant impacts of these utility allowance adjustments. In this case, that middle yellow bar again reflects the baseline changes, but they're higher proportionally because of they're basically a percentage takedown from the existing schedule. So they have a much more significant effect on a household that's only receiving a 30% solar credit. And again, you have the solar credit reductions factored in there. So at the end of the day, for, again, this particular household, we get into kind of negative benefit territory, which becomes problematic if we're looking to the households to also make a contribution towards their solar system. So lastly, in our analysis, we kind of looked at additional strategies that might be useful to improve project economics and kind of reverse or at least mitigate some of the trends that we're seeing. And this chart here takes another look at the cost coverage for common areas where a solar investments are possible. And in this regard, as Seth had kind of pointed out, this financial opportunity is very specifically focused on properties that are subject to demand charges. Not all multifamily properties have demand charges. And here we modeled the additional savings that might be realized if monthly peak loads are reduced below thresholds that are set by utility. And the middle bar, the kind of light greenish bar, shows a scenario where monthly peak loads are reduced, but where the property cannot opt into an alternative utility rate schedule. So what we see are kind of modest gains, as Seth had kind of pointed out, in cash flow, and these gains equate to additional ability to cover additional costs associated with project. And in this scenario, the cost of the solar system are incorporated with the costs of the energy storage system. The bar on the left reflects that really exciting scenario that Seth mentioned, where monthly peak loads are reduced, as in the middle bar, but where the property can opt into an alternative utility rate schedule without demand charges. And in this case, the shift is from the TOU-A schedule, AL schedule, to the TOU-A schedule. So in assessing these options, we see that middle scenario still has some challenges to it. It's not recovering so much of the project cost that it really pencils out, I think, from an underwriting standpoint. So additional investments would likely be needed to kind of support that. And from a policy side, there would be some questions, I think, with respect to the cost effectiveness of that type of investment. On the latter option, though, however, we see really robust increases to the potential cost coverage. In fact, we were able to recover almost just shy of 80% of the costs from the energy savings generated from the combined or paired system. And here, not only does it improve project economics, but I think it in the context of solar programs that are in California, it actually enhances the performance of these programs. So the implications here are that storage can open up new revenue streams, that properties can opt into, that can opt into alternative schedules, are really going to see significant, or could see significant cost increases or cash flow increases. And their financing options, I think, are greatly enhanced. And some of these integrated systems in that case can improve their effectiveness and actually reduce the incentive requirements that might be needed to support these installations. And while this is encouraging, and I think it is definitely encouraging, this scenario, again, may be only relevant to a small portion of multifamily properties, maybe as little as 10% or so of the multifamily populations. Hence, I think we're going to need more market analysis to determine really what portion of the multifamily market have demand charges, and really, probably more even importantly, what the load profiles of these multifamily buildings are, so that these we get a better understanding about the savings potential. Lastly and finally, this slide takes a look at similar look at tenant benefits under a scenario where solar is in play. And here I think it's important to kind of note that the energy savings that could be realized from TOU cost shifting are for tenants are small, and the level of savings would not by themselves be a sufficient justification for the investment. However, where storage is otherwise installed at a property to shave peak loads, and where a virtual net metering tariff is in use and benefits can be more broadly shared with tenants, it might be possible for tenants to capture some benefit from these systems. And here in the chart shows the potential ancillary benefits from cost shifting, where it's possible to configure the energy storage system to shave peak load demands, which would be its first priority, and secondarily provide limited cost shifting benefits at the property, which could be more widely distributed and beneficial to the tenants. And while this may be kind of an optimistic forecast, and I think more work needs to be done to kind of validate this at other properties, this chart illustrates that the potential role that solars can have in kind of protecting tenant benefit levels. So with that, Seth and Megan, I have concluded, and perhaps we can open it up for discussion.
Sounds good. Thank you, Wayne. So yeah, I think we both had more to say than we thought we were going to. We do have some time left here for questions, and I think we both have a bit of time to stay over after. So we've had some very good questions coming in. The first one I'm going to throw over to you, Wayne. This actually came in before the webinar even started, somebody that seems very familiar with this work. Question is, what percentage of multifamily affordable housing complexes are on rate tariffs that have demand charges? And of those, what percentage of the, they say 6,000 properties, are you hoping that the storage economics would work on?
Right. Well, within California, there are approximately 6,000 properties that are eligible for this program that kind of Seth had mentioned. No one in California has completed a market segmentation analysis to really understand what the storage potential is. What we know up to now is really kind of anecdotal information, and just based upon different properties that we work with, the studies, as Seth has mentioned, that have been kind of previously done. And so I do not have kind of let's say a scientific or kind of a fact-based answer. What I can say is that just based anecdotally, I think that we're probably in the 10% and possibly maximum 20% range of the multifamily profile. I wouldn't put it any higher than that. But again, I think that to be fair, I think we need a harder look at the data. I think the utility companies have some of this data, and in the next several months, I think we're hoping to kind of do a more specific analysis so that we know really what the opportunity is. But even at 10%, even if we're talking about 10% of the 6,000 properties, or even 5% of the 6,000 properties, there's a potential to, again, improve the project economics, which, again, if we're looking at benefits not only to a particular property, but also potentially to the program, because it might require less incentives overall I don't know that it's worth excluding properties just because there's only 10% or so where this is a real deal.
Great,
Seth?
Thanks, Wayne. A question I'm also going to throw your way. You're more familiar with how these policies are structured than I am, for sure. Is there any lock-in period? This is just for locking in rates when affordable housing property owners can count on their rates not changing to make the decision to add solar?
In terms of a lock-in provision, I think that some of the decisions have grandfathered different tariffs and structures, I think, as they go forward. With respect to 693, I think that there's an expectation, really, and a requirement now that any program under this kind of new solar, any project under this new solar program would need to convert to time of use rates, and that's not really so much of an issue, I think, for the property side of things, the commercial side of things, which are probably already on TOU rates. But for tenants, I think that there would be an issue there. And so I don't, at least up till now, I don't think that there's any election to opt out of it. I think some folks have proposed that, but there's certainly no decision that that's permissible. And I think that once you're on a TOU rate, it's whatever that TOU rate is. So if they change the TOU period and the rate structure associated with that, then that's kind of what you're left with. And the same would apply to property owners on the demand side, demand charge side. The demand charges, if they're paying them, they're there, and there's no exemption or no kind of grandfathering out of increases to demand charges.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So a question about virtual net metering configuration is a very good question. It's asking about storage, whether it's installed in front of the meter between the PV inverter and the NGO meter, which is the meter that records the output of the virtual net metering system, or behind the meter for the common area account. I'll provide my take on this and then see, Wayne, if you had any additional thoughts. I think that's still a question that's a bit up in the air. If you have one battery that you're expecting to provide split benefits between the owner and the tenants, it may make sense to put it in front of the meter. So on the virtual net metering, the pretty much the same kind of location as where the solar system is installed. If you're more focused on benefiting the building owner, the property itself, it may make more sense to install the energy storage system behind the building meter. Tenants could also potentially benefit from having smaller storage systems installed behind their meters. There's really no definition exactly of how the configuration is going to work at this point under virtual net metering. I think that's still a little up in the air. Wayne, you may have a different take on that than I do.
Yeah, I don't think it's different. It's but just from a different angle. I think that the CP in California, there just a kind of a number of decisions as to how this works, and I think with respect to these paired systems, there is kind of a genuine and an important interest on the part of the Public Utilities Commission to make sure that any storage that's exported to the grid is in fact generated from a renewable energy source or facility like a PV array on a building. And so they have, a couple years back, they have established some rules, I think, governing that. And the general rule is that if you're an exporting facility, that is, if you're exporting, discharging storage to the grid, that there needs to be an inverter and a meter on that storage system. And the rule is written specifically for kind of a behind-the-meter application. And as I think, Seth, what you were pointing out is that there are some questions as to whether or not and how this decision would apply or would be implemented in a virtual net metering context where the PV array, the paired system, would be in a sense in front of the meters for the common area and for the tenants. Would be an AC coupling. And the general view that I have is that in that scenario where we have kind of a paired virtual net metering system, really all of the generation that's exported to the grid is renewable generation, and because it can't go back to the property to offset usage at the property, it really goes one way. And in the virtual net metering context, there's already a hookup. That is, there's already a requirement under virtual net metering or net aggregated metering for a net generation output meter. So so there's some questions here as to whether that hookup, in a sense, complies, I think, with the PUC decision, and I think more clarity needs to be provided there. But again, if all the energy that's generated or exported from this pair system is by definition renewable generation, then I believe that it meets the intent and objective of the Commission to ensure that any exports are renewable energy generated. Seth?
Yeah, no, great. Thank you, Wayne. It looks like we're over time here. There's one other question that I would like to get to because I think it's a very good question. A couple of people actually asked. They're asking about the rate switching case and if there is any penalty if the system fails to hold demand below 20 kilowatts and how that potential economic risk, if there is one, could be mitigated. I'll field this one. From my understanding, I believe if a system does elect to go onto the lower rate, but then has a demand above the 20 kilowatt threshold, they will retroactively be applied back to the previous rate tariff. So they would go back to the demand charge rate tariff. If they failed to meet that 20 kilowatt threshold, it could be imposed some back fees on that. As far as how the risk could be mitigated, there are some performance guarantees that certain energy storage companies are providing. I just saw that announcement that a company called Green Charge is providing this. Now, these are for systems that are third-party owned, so they'd be owned and operated by the storage company, but they would provide a performance guarantee, and usually these are kind of done under a shared savings model where they guarantee, or a service model where you pay a certain amount each month for the service, and then they provide a guarantee that they will perform at a certain level, say dropping your kilowatt demand 10 kilowatts per month at least. So there are ways to mitigate that risk. But if, say, a building's installed some new equipment that was going to have a big power draw, that should certainly be taken into account and considered the impact that it could have on keeping under that threshold. Wayne, did you have anything to add to that?
Just briefly, I think the answer you provided is excellent. The tariffs that I have looked at, and again, we downloaded a whole lot of tariffs that we were modeling across different IOU jurisdictions. With respect to this demand charge issue, what you're saying is right, and in the text of the tariff, in many cases, there is a provision that it must exceed that threshold for a number of consecutive months or something like that. So it's not that I think what I'm getting at is that I don't think the trigger is, oh, you went over 1 month and now it's an automatic reversion. I think that you would have to, it would have to be kind of a demonstrated thing where the property is now exceeding that maximum monthly peak load threshold by over a period of several months. So I think that there's some time factor in there as well.
Great. That's a great extra insight. I was not aware of that. So thank you for that. So I think we're enough over time. We're going to close things off right now. Sorry to people that did not get their questions answered. For those of you that did not, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Wayne, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you to everyone that joined us today. Thank you very much, Wayne. This has been very informative webinar, and thank you to Sam for running things in the background. Sam, do you have any closing thoughts for folks today?
Thanks, Seth. Well, I just want to direct everyone to our website, which is resilient-powered.org. We have some other webinars in the works right now, and those will be posted up on our website soon. So keep an eye out for those. And thanks, everybody.